I think we've all, at some point or another, have done one of those silly trust walks. You know, the thing where your company or some organization you're a part of thinks we need to have everybody learn what it means to trust one another. And so they pair everyone up and they have obstacle courses or something like that. And one of the partners in the pair gets a blindfold. They can't see anything now. And the other person in the pair is supposed to guide them through the obstacle course without them getting injured or without them stumbling over anything in that trust walk. Sometimes it's them actually leading them by the hands or in some way physically, but sometimes it's with just verbal instructions: turn left, turn right, go straight about two steps, things like that. But we've all experienced this before, and we know that if we've ever been in the position of being the blindfolded one, that it's very, very difficult not being in control. That having to listen to somebody who's not currently in your exact shoes tell you what to do, it's very, very difficult. And in fact, it's actually a fairly effective way to learn what it really means to trust someone else, to put your life into someone else's hands and to trust that they're going to guide you correctly. Well, this is really what we've been talking about this week so far with the concept of trust and trusting the Lord. It is very difficult for us to realize and recognize that we're walking through this world and this life fairly blindfolded. We can't see everything that God can see. We can't know the future, but God knows the future. And so we need to learn that God is the one who can truly guide us in this walk of life. It's an interesting thing to think about when we reflect on the life of David. You see, David, throughout his ministry to the people of Israel as the king, and even before that, went through these bouts of having to really rely on the Lord because everything around him seemed like it was falling apart. Multiple times, sons of his tried to usurp his throne. The people were angry and frustrated with him and his leadership and what he was doing as the king. And pretenders came to try and take him away from his position that God had given to him. And then on top of that, before any of his ministry as the king of Israel, he was given this role of being the next king of Israel, and the current king of Israel hadn't yet given up his throne. And so David had to be persecuted by the one who was supposed to mentor him, the one who was supposed to be passing on the crown to him. And David was doggedly loyal to Saul, and yet Saul persecuted him over and over and over again. So David went through these various times in his life where his entire existence, his legitimacy as the king, his future that was before him, all were completely up in the air. And he had to walk trusting that the Lord knew what he was doing, and that if he were to stay faithful and obedient to God, that God would bring him through it. We see kind of these stories from opposite ends when we look at Psalm 56. We see in Psalm 56, David in the midst of persecution, David in the midst of opposition, and crying out to God and asking God for help. And in the middle of that cry, David throws himself upon the Lord and says, "In you I trust. In you I trust." So even in the midst of his life seeming to fall apart and everything around him falling down, David casts his trust on God. And then we see on the opposite end of the spectrum of one of these bouts of struggle in 2 Samuel 22, David coming out on the good side of things. And we see a praise and an admonition before the Lord and just a glorious thanksgiving that he writes out for what God has done for him in delivering him from his enemies. And in the midst of that, David says, "You are my rock and my refuge. In you I trust. Good times, bad times, no matter what David was going through, David decided to walk his life in trust that the Lord was guiding him. This is also our call as the people of God. So let us come. Let us reflect together on what it means to walk daily, placing ourselves in the trust of our Lord, knowing that only God can guide us through whatever circumstance we find us in. Come back tomorrow and we'll continue to reflect on trust.